All right, I have a scenario for you. You're at the airport, you're getting ready to board a flight, and the thing happens that you don't want to have happen. You start to see a delay pop up and then another delay. Next thing you know, you're realizing that you are going to be in a world of hurt for the rest of your day, flight experience, whatever it is. We're going to talk about delays, diversions, all those things, because we just experienced it ourselves literally yesterday. Coming up next on the podcast. Welcome back. My name is Ryan.
I'm Lauren, and this is the Millers in Motion podcast.
And yes, exactly what I just said just happened. So this is one of our first podcasts where we're literally going to hit the record button, no editing, and it is pretty much going to go up as soon as we're done talking. So you're getting this unfiltered, unbiased, and Lauren just gave me a look like, oh no, Ryan, unfiltered.
And we may still be a little tired.
Little?
A lot.
So I'm going to set the stage for you because we'll talk about this trip as a whole in a later episode. But what we recently did is we had tickets to a Green Bay Packer game. We were in the Dallas-Fort Worth area like we normally are. And we flew. Now, I will tell you, and the reason why I'm going to talk about this in depth is we flew into Milwaukee, stayed in Madison, drove to Green Bay, drove back to Madison, drove to Milwaukee, flew out of Milwaukee. And I'll explain why in another episode, so go with us. I know it sounds like chaos, and it was.
Just understand there was a reason.
There was a reason. So we're at the Milwaukee airport, and we are checked in. We're through security, and we get the first notification that our flight's about 30 or 45 minutes delayed, which that's not uncommon, right? That happens, especially in later flights in the evenings. And again, we have so many shows planned for tips and tricks on flying and other things, but that's that first notification. Then all of a sudden we get another one, and then we get the option to book another day with a travel credit, which means now they're trying to actively pull people off of the plane if they can. So yeah, that starts to happen. Then from there, we actually they get on and they tell us what's going on, which essentially was, if you don't know what happened weather-wise in the United States, there was a very, very large section of bad weather that went all the way from the southwest side of Texas all the way up into the Chicago area and through the Great Lakes. And it was moving west to east. It wasn't moving very fast, and there was all kinds of severe weather all across the country, which caused all kinds of flight chaos. So they essentially tell us that DFW is in a ground stop, which means they won't allow the flights in, which includes ours. So they're holding us there. So we actually get on the plane at first. Then that's when they explain this to us. So we get back off the plane. So now we've boarded once. And then they go into a little more detail. The captain comes up. He goes into a little more detail once we're all back in the terminal. And then they make the decision, about an hour later, babe?
Mm-hmm.
To actually go ahead and let's get going. So we get back on the plane. Lauren and I are kind of excited because we were already having the conversation of, do we drive? Do we find a different flight?
And for record, the drive home would have been something like 15 hours. So we're not talking a small decision. Like, this was a big decision whether or not we wanted to actually do that.
Yeah. And so, and there was other options too. We had found a flight the next morning out of Madison. We could have just driven back, stayed at my parents' house, and then flown back the next day. So there were some options. None of them amazing, but there were options. So we get on the flight, and we start to head, I guess, west initially and then south. We took a different route because of the storms.
Right. And the pilot did tell us about that. He was like, we're going to take a little bit of a westerly route, try and skirt around some of these. So we didn't see any problem with that. The first indication I had that there was a problem was when I felt the plane slow down. When you're midway through the flight, your plane's not supposed to slow down. Yeah,
and the feeling she's talking about is if you when you're kind of landing and you feel that little, like, almost like your shoulders move a little forward kind of a thing.
It's almost like a drag.
Yeah, a little bit, because it's not, and that's just them laying off the throttle is all it really is.
Sure.
So that we start to come down, and we're somewhere southwest of St. Louis at this point, and that's when Lauren noticed that, and without a tick, about 5 or 10 minutes later, the captain gets on a flight and says, gets on the flight. Hopefully he's on the flight. Gets on the PA thing and says, unfortunately, they've reclosed DFW Airport's airspace. They're not accepting any more in, and we're already in the air. So we get diverted which a diversion can be a go land somewhere else, or it could be go fly in a particular pattern somewhere else. So in this scenario, we're flying in a particular pattern. I was looking at FlightAware after we got off the plane at one point, and it was funny because we looped around like we were doing a NASCAR track around Wichita, Kansas. So we did that, and then I think we did that for like 20 minutes or 30 minutes, and then they found out that we're going to be doing that for hours on end. Well, when you're in the air, obviously fuel is a real thing. You don't get to fly endlessly, and they can't mid-air refuel a commercial plane. So,
well, and we're not the only ones. I mean, what if there's other planes also NASCAR tracking around Wichita? That's dangerous.
Yeah, apparently this was happening all over the country. This wasn't just a particular to us thing. This is just our experience. So we find out that we're going to be diverted to Kansas City. Sorry, I had to think about that. I wanted to say St. Louis, and that wasn't right. So we get diverted to Kansas City, and we actually land, which obviously at this point you're going, oh no. So they pull up to the gate, which I think was more of just a go park over here and sit there for a minute kind of a situation. And of course, what do I do? And keep in mind, we're flying in economy. I'm not a small human being. If you've seen any of the YouTube videos, I'm 6'2", pounds. And I don't fit in an economy seat all that great. So any opportunity I have to stand up, I take it because it allows me to stretch my legs, my back, all those things.
And for the seat not to touch you.
And for the seat not to hug me more than touch me. It's a snuggly situation on the plane. So I naturally just pop up and grab my backpack from the overhead, and I grab Lauren's thing because I'm assuming we're getting off the plane. Well, a lot of other people did the same thing. I wasn't the only one. I was definitely in the minority as far as grabbing bags, but I was. And then it turns out we were just sitting there. So I put them back up, and I kind of went back and forth from standing and sitting. But then we're starting to run into the issue of our pilot's service time was about the timeout, which means they can only fly so many hours a day, and then they have to be off for so many hours and actually getting rest, and that's an FAA rule and law and all those things. So we find out we're staying overnight.
Well, we had an inkling of that at one point.
An inkling?
Because while we were sitting there, I don't want to say they were giving us hope because they weren't actually, but
no, they were not.
But it was vague. They hadn't made a decision. We couldn't, blah, blah, blah. But the bags started being offloaded from beneath. And
Lauren
it was
could see that from her window seat, by the way.
And I could feel it. And I was like, uh-oh, if they're taking the bags off the plane, there's a really good chance they're taking us off the plane.
Yeah, there's a decent chance. And so, I mean, obviously they could have just, forced a habit, started doing it. But yeah, the bags started to come off, and that's about the same time that the pilot got on the PA and said, unfortunately, they won't give us an arrival time, which means we can't go until we get that arrival time because of their timeout. They had 2 hours left in their timeout, but the problem is you have an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes left of fly time. So if they didn't get an answer from dispatch in 20 minutes or less, it didn't matter. If we got an arrival time that night, our pilot couldn't physically fly the plane anymore. So,
but there was also no good decision because when we arrived in Kansas City, and they didn't have a gate and some of these things for us to pull up to at first even. So
yeah, we were actually at a Frontier gate, and that's also doubles as a international gate. Typically an American. So we were on American. I was actually leaving the brand out of this intentionally, but here we are. So this is an American Airlines flight. We typically fly American because of DFW is their home hub, and they have hubs in areas we travel. And so it's just a very common thing for us.
So we're at a gate that is a different airlines and international versus not international. And there was something with the software that had to do with getting us off and on the plane.
The software was designed. So the software that was loaded on the computer was for Frontier. So they couldn't physically use it because they'd have to get into American's database, not Frontier's.
So there were a whole lot of issues, not only with getting us to DFW, but either getting us off or on the plane at this airport.
Literally,
at this gate.
No one wanted us to get off.
Right.
The pilot didn't want to get off because he wanted. I mean, keep in mind too, this is a Dallas-Fort Worth-based flight crew, which means they're supposed to be home for dinner with their families or whatever their normal game plan is, and now they're sitting just like the rest of us. And I think people lose that. And we're going to talk a little about how we handle it, but I think people lose the fact that that's real people on the other side of that are also being stuck away from their families. They don't want to be diverted. They don't want to divert you. Trust me. They want to go home just like you want to go home after work.
And Mr. Pilot Man fought for us.
He did. You could tell. I always joke sometimes when you fly, like when we were flying up there, we were sitting at the gate and we were an early flight, and it was the first flight out from this gate, which typically the plane's sitting there, but for whatever reason it wasn't, which means they staged it somewhere on a storage area of the tarmac, and they were late getting it to the gate, which is literally just, hey, this pilot needs to go out there, get in it, and drive it over here, and then get out of it. That's all they had to do. And it was 30 minutes late taking off because they just didn't. And it annoys me when everybody's just kind of joking around. I don't care if there's nothing you can do. Don't do that in front of customers. Act like you care a little bit, and at least don't joke around about being late and all these other things. And so just act like you're trying and put a little sense of urgency on it, because everybody else is sitting there and spent a lot of money to be on this flight, and it seems like you could give less of a crap, and we're the ones paying your salary at the end of the day. So anyway, in this scenario, everybody we ran into seemed like they were legitimately trying. The pilot actually seemed like he was starting to get frustrated because he wasn't getting any answers, which I don't think anybody was getting any answers, but it definitely felt like he was trying.
Well, and he said multiple times, in my 35 years of doing this, blah, 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 like you could tell that this had not happened to him. He hadn't had to deal with this situation and the lack of communication to the extent, whatever. So I know he was frustrated, which I didn't like for him, but I also appreciated that at least he was frustrated and really trying.
You can tell someone actually cared.
Yeah.
And I think that's the portion that's at the end of the day, when it comes to flying and travel, especially flying, that's all I really ask for. I get that there's a lot of things out of their control, but if they care, they're lobbying for you. So anyway, so in a nutshell, we get stuck overnight in Kansas City, so we saw it without seeing it.
I asked him if it count. Can we take it off the map? Because technically we got off the airplane and we left the airport and we had a meal. Does that count?
No, not even a little bit.
I know, it doesn't.
It was also dark and rainy when we landed, so we ended up having to stay the night there, which again we'll get into in a minute. And from there, we spent the night, and then we reboarded somewhere around 10:30, 10:45. We took off somewhere around 11-ish, and then we completed the rest of the flight the next day. That is a very condensed version of what really happened, obviously.
Oh, so much.
Yeah. And then we landed in DFW, and honestly, after we took off from Kansas City, everything was smooth and normal.
Even the boarding, getting back on, at 10:30 in the morning, whatever it was pretty smooth, I thought.
It's a miracle when you let everybody go get some rest and some food, what happens.
Food. That's going to be a key whenever we go into the details of this.
So in a nutshell, that's what happened. We got back. Everything was normal after that, so we're not really going to talk about that portion. So
right.
It's one of those things that there's two types of people in this world. You're going to hear Lauren say this a lot, as far as I think this started back when we used to do the Thanksgiving 4K. She's like, there's two types of people in this world: people that run 5Ks and people that don't. There's a picture of me on the don't and her on the in. And ever since then, that's kind of been a thing we do whenever it's like we're different people. Obviously, we're different people. We see out on a lot of things, but how we approach it sometimes is very different. So, and I'm one of those people that, for some reason, things stress me out. I'm not going to say they don't. But for whatever reason, this kind of stuff does not. I think I get a little anxious sometimes in some of those scenarios when it's like you have to think fast, and I feel responsible for the other people traveling with us. But it doesn't necessarily stress me out. Whereas air travel, for the most part, stresses everyone else out, including you.
Absolutely. No, it does. It stresses me out. And I know how this sounds, but it's a little bit of the lack of control.
Right.
And so I don't get to control. It really irks me to go into, you can't take fluids into the airport, and then all of a sudden you have to buy a $6 bottle of water. I don't like that.
Did you say what did you say
you can't take fluids?
Oh, I thought you said booze. I was like, what the? I heard booze come out of your mouth. I'm like, well, yeah, that's kind of a thing.
No, it's that you have to arrive on time and go through all this rigmarole and whatnot. Right. So often there's kind of a negative attitude with a lot of either travelers or the staff or the this or the that. There's the lack of control over the entire situation, whether it's the food, the security line, the timing, so many of these things. And I don't like that. I'm an independent person, and I would just rather drive myself and do what I want.
And I will tell you, I think, at the root cause of a lot of those things is, with the on the passenger side, at least. Obviously with the airlines, that's a whole different corporate thing. That's a very long and lengthy conversation I don't want to have. I think, and then this is a problem with society as a whole right now, is nobody has respect for someone else's space, property, time, anything. Like that seems to be gone completely. Like they're just either completely unaware and ignorant to the situation or don't give a crap.
And I think it's almost an overstimulation in a matter of ways that we're pushed to the max of cramming so much activity or so much whatever it is that you start to lose focus. And maybe that's what it is.
Maybe. But either way is take 5 seconds and realize there's people around you before you do and say things. So, from the standpoint of would we do it again? We talked about this trip a couple of times since we've landed now, and obviously this one, and again, we'll go into detail about the whole trip but later, it was a comedy of errors, not necessarily from the beginning, but pretty quick.
It really was, and ultimately, so many of these things were not in our control, and we're trying to have a respect for that, and that there were things that either weren't in our control, like the weather.
Right.
No matter what you do, you're not going to have control over that or whatever. And it's not that anything we did was wrong. It's not like we intentionally had a 30-minute layover trying to catch a new flight.
Right.
We didn't do anything wild.
Yeah, and I think that's important to note. Everything we had was nonstop, even though it became stop. And so it's not like sometimes people cram too small of a layover in. Like I really try to not do anything under an hour when it comes to a layover. The worst thing that happens is you go use the restroom. You take a break. You go find something to do for a little bit, and you move around because you've been sitting. So, it's one of those things. Now, weather obviously is out of your control. Sometimes when it's flight crew related, that's a little frustrating. This was not the case. Like if somebody's just late for work, that's a pet peeve of mine, big time. And if any of my employees that used to work for me knew that very drastically, I'm very much so the believer if you're on time, you're technically late.
The other thing I don't think that we mentioned that we didn't have control over was this was right before the election, and there were some politicians in and around the airport. So I think that the initial delay on our flight, because the incoming flights weren't delayed, ours did get delayed, and 30 minutes an hour or whatever. I think it had something to do with that.
I was going to say,
so then that begs the question: if we'd left an hour earlier, what would have been the situation?
That would have been great if there was a flight an hour earlier.
Well, if we'd left on time at 5:30 instead of 6:30,
gotcha.
Would the storm situation or the ground hold, whatever that would any of that have been different?
So I will tell you that obviously, like, as we were coming into, we flew in and out of Milwaukee. Obviously, the election ended. I guess technically the election ended last night at some point, but we're finding out results as we speak, and so this was flying out. At least we were supposed to fly out Monday, which we kind of did. So that was a little bit of a problem because both vice presidential candidates were in town. And then when we came in, both presidential candidates were in town. And so because this is a very, very current podcast, it actually is relevant to what was going on at that time. So as far as how we kind of dealt with stuff, I mean, there's the things happen and then things that happen in this scenario were kind of out of our control. So now how do you deal with it? The decision-making process. How do you de-escalate your stress level as much as you possibly can? The way up, literally nothing we could have done. That flight, for the most part, was fine, minus the delayed start, which was out of our control. And so it's just one of those it's not that big of a deal for 30 minutes late. This is why you don't plan stuff immediately after. Like, it's not like we're missing something and losing money because of this thing over here.
Right.
So as far as getting out now, I do think that you have to be strategic about booking your flights, which we had a conversation about that at breakfast yesterday morning. And I'm a firm believer in as long as you're physically able to do it, the earlier the better. When you think about flight delays, like as the day starts progressing, let's say there's a delay in Florida for some reason. Well, that plane that you're on from Milwaukee to Dallas could have gone from Dallas to Miami to Fort Lauderdale to Charlotte to Milwaukee. Now you're on it. Well, if one little nick in that thing happens over there, you're going to be late no matter what.
Right. It's a domino effect.
Right. And so I'm a firm believer in book as early as you possibly can. Now, sometimes schedules don't allow for that, and it is what it is. So
right, and we intentionally, unintentionally, I don't know, chose a little bit of a later flight for a couple of reasons. First of all, the NFL game that we were going to had the potential to be flexed, which means they could have bumped it to the evening. Now, if that had been a 7:30 game and lasted until 10:30.
So just as a frame of reference, it was a 3:25 start. It was Packers versus Lions this last Sunday. 3:25 start. We didn't get back to Madison till about 11 o'clock at night because of traffic, and we also stopped and grabbed a bite to eat, which was literally run in for fast food, run back out, eat on the road. So we were not at the Arby's for longer than like 10 minutes or so.
And this comes back to that planning that we didn't want to cram too much.
Right.
So if it had been flexed and we had actually gotten back to Madison 3 or 4 hours later than 11 o'clock at night, and then still had to make an hour and a half drive to Milwaukee to get on the first flight of the morning or something, 7 a.m.-ish, that essentially puts us not getting sleep that night.
I was going to say we wouldn't have actually slept at that point. We probably would have just gone from Green Bay to Milwaukee and either paid for a hotel room for a couple of hours to take showers and get cleaned up, or, if there was lounge access, go through the list of possible things.
So that was kind of the scenario we were working with, and we saw it as a bonus that we got to spend a little bit more time in Milwaukee, which we thoroughly enjoyed, actually.
We did, and I've already got a podcast planned on our little to-do outline list to do that podcast because we actually really did like Milwaukee. And so now, with that being said, that's how we planned that trip, and we were doing our portion of it. I mean, the trip itself had a whole lot of cold, wet chaos, and the Packers lost, so that wasn't exactly helpful.
Again, things we can't control, but sucked anyways.
We had some good beer and some good food, though. And so, from there, we got to the airport more than enough time. I would argue we got there too early, but that's also when you're not doing anything and you're like, well, we're done. Like, I guess we'll just go to the airport. I'd rather hang out where I need to be versus hang out where I don't need to be. And so now, granted, food and beverages are a little more expensive at the airport, but it's also one of those kind of necessary evil things. So,
and we both have TSA pre-check, so we breeze through the little lines, and security's not usually a deal.
I was about to say, full disclosure, security at Milwaukee is not like Dallas Fort Worth, JFK, LAX. You don't really need TSA there necessarily from a speed perspective. I like pre-check because I don't. We carry a lot of electronic gear because of the camera stuff and the computers and all that stuff, and I hate unpacking. I typically have to take my laptop out, my camera out, and one or two other things, and so I do it because of that.
But that just goes into ways that we've tried to show preparedness,
right?
That we've tried to make this the easiest, smoothest possible, situation.
So the first time that we kind of came to a point and said maybe we should consider alternate modes was really when we, because they delayed it a little bit getting on, but that's kind of common. So I didn't think much of it. I mean, it's a little annoying, but it's one of those well, that sucks.
Yeah.
And then you kind of move on. When we boarded and got back off, it became a little more like, uh-oh. Because they had intended on leaving and then couldn't. And so there's something bigger afoot at that point. And so we started, and this is the thing I think you have to be careful about because you can snowball real fast. And I say this from a stress level perspective. So you have to have an alternate game plan because you're talking about anywhere from 175, reasonably full flight, 175 people to 250 people on a domestic flight. And if everybody decides to go rent a car, there's not going to be enough cars. And so unfortunately, you kind of need to be a step ahead of everybody else on your flight. And so that's when my travel brain kind of kicks into high gear and I go, okay, well, if we can't make this flight happen, if it gets canceled for some reason, what's the alternatives? So for us, we sat there and we had a quick little conversation. I think you started looking at rental cars and I looked at flights, and then we flipped a little bit and we found a couple of options. One, we could rent a car and just drive it. Like you said, 15 hours. It is what it is.
But we were exhausted, and that was probably not the safest option.
No, which will come into play later. Mm-hmm. And then the other option was we had found an early morning flight the next day out of Madison. So we could have just rented a car, driven back to Madison, which was only like an hour and a half-ish drive. So not terrible, especially if you followed any of our RV travels and understand where those people.
And it's a pretty straightforward, easy drive.
It is. It's a straight shot right into Madison. My parents live on the west side, unfortunately. But
so we had a place to stay, easier drive. That was a valid option.
Right. And so we decided, sorry, my chair's creaky.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Jeez.
All the year and a half of travel on our Valor's taking its toll. So we decide we'll just sit it out for a little bit and see what happens. And then we end up getting on the flight, and my brain goes back into cool, we're good mode.
And I'll admit, mine did too. I was like, oh, we're in the air. Okay, we're good.
So I think this is the first important part as far as talking about maintaining a correct level of anxiety and stress. I mean, obviously anxiety you might not be able to control, but don't let your mind wander. When you're pre-planning, come up with a game plan, accept it, move on. Like, don't dwell on it. And I'm guilty of dwelling on it because I think there might be a better or more effective plan out there.
Right. And so there's actually a rule of thumb whenever people are talking about this. There's some psychology that goes into it. And if you actually develop, instead of just snowballing, right, because that's what most people tend to do, develop 3 plans, 3 doable plans.
We had 2. Well, I guess 3 was keep doing this.
Keep doing this, yes. And so develop 3 plans and then pick either the most logical or the most likely.
Right. Which for us was, we had goals, right? I think I asked you early on, it's like, well, do we want to get there as cheap as possible or do we want to get there as fast as possible? Because typically in air travel, those 2 things don't normally coincide. Sometimes they do, especially when you're looking for last second, trying to figure it out. You're not getting cheap. So you have to kind of decide what you want to do. And we kind of said, it just depends. And for most people, it's a slider scale. I mean, if we're going to get 2 hours, isn't that big of a deal, but 24 is kind of a deal. So we had our game plans. We get back on the flight and we start to fly, which we think we're good. We're watching our movies and doing our thing.
A little hangry, but we're there. We're doing it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. We should have grabbed food before we left, at least something. Like, we had lunch, but we look back at it and we're like, ooh, we didn't eat a lot of protein there. It was a lot of carbs and cheese. Shocker, in Wisconsin, it's carbs and cheese.
And it was an early lunch, but with the mindset of no big deal. Once we land in DFW, we're just going to grab something real quick and then on the way home and we're going to be great.
Yep. And so that's the one thing I would say is, plan on, even if you end up with a little extra food, that's not the worst thing in the world. Just wrap it up and put it in your little cubby up front and you got a snack for later.
The situation's always worse if you're hungry or tired.
Yep, which unfortunately, at least on the hungry side, you got there. I got there at the end, but you got there before I did. The tired thing really set in for me because I did most of the driving up in Wisconsin, so I was a little more mentally shot from that.
You were, and I also have a different mentality than you. I guess med school, whatever it was like, I can do anything. I can Red Bull and power through this. Yeah. I can be tired for 12 hours if it makes it end.
Well, and I have that mentality to a point, but it also doesn't change the fact that my body doesn't.
I tell my body to sit down and shut up.
and it hits that line. Now, if I had chugged a Red Bull, 20 minutes later, I'm probably going to start shaking. But anyway, so we find out that we are not making it to DFW. So we land. And, there's that uncertainty thing, and that's where you have to really be careful of your mental status because we didn't know if we were going to taxi back out and take off. They just needed to get us on the ground because we weren't going to have enough fuel situation. And we just need to sit here for 30 minutes, 45 minutes until the airspace reopens, and then we continue on our way.
Right. And so that's some of it is waiting until you have the information to make a decision.
Now, there were people on the plane that did not wait.
Oh, yes.
So
we watched them.
Yep. I was talking to a guy that was right in front of us on the other side of the aisle, and he not only had another flight booked for the next day, just in case, he had also booked a rental car. Now, granted, he was on a business trip and had a very big meeting the next day.
And I think he also had company funds to spend.
Yeah, he did.
He was not spending his own personal dimes necessarily. But, I get it. He had priorities. And so those were the things that led him to that decision.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, too, typically with corporate accounts and that kind of stuff, you also have a better cancellation policy. Yeah. So he could have gotten out of some things there with less of a financial hit, well, zero to him, but less of a hit to the company kind of a thing. So
he's also the guy that had the unlimited Wi-Fi and could do all of these things, whereas not all of us did.
Well, okay, I very well know the company that he worked for, and he based on the level he worked at, he fine. Yeah, no problems there. So you do have to be careful about letting your mind wander in those times and try to just kind of think about something else, listen to some music, and then, listen when they talk kind of a thing. When we got off the plane and they kind of said this, we're down for the night, that's when you just have to take the information, retain it, and then walk away for a second, then process it. Now, this is where you could probably stress out the most because there are another, again, 175 to 200 feet. I have no idea how many people were on our flight. It was in there somewhere. Are trying to make the same decision. So whether it's hotels, here's where it becomes interesting, at least for us. The Chiefs were playing a Monday night football game.
Sunday night?
Or Sunday night football game, sorry.
So we land Sunday night.
Yeah, sorry, I forget. The travel took too long. My brain's a little dazed.
Yeah.
One big weird day. So the Chiefs are in town, And unfortunately for people that fly into games in Kansas City, apparently they like to stay by the hotel because it's not far from the stadium.
By the airport?
Or by the airport. Yeah, they like to stay by the hotel. I hope.
I sure hope so.
No, I like to stay in the parking lot by the Quick Trip instead of at the hotel I booked. It's an RVer move right there. So what they told us was everything's booked up. Well, you got to remember, too, because you were diverted, regardless of weather, they're required to a certain dollar amount by law to cover your expenses because you were not expected to be in that city.
Correct. And there are some kind of caveats that go with it. But yes, and that's your housing, that's your food, and that can be transportation, among other things. So if you have to Uber somewhere to get to the hotel, now it's non-leisure. If you submit a receipt for we ended up going to the museum while we were here, they're probably not going to cover that. But your basic life essentials kind of a thing. So we decide that we're going to stay. Now, the options we had at the time or decided to go with was we could either drive back, but at that point, because the flight had taken off, they're not going to refund us our tickets, more than likely. I mean, I might have been able to convince that to happen, but the initial company policy and reaction was that was not happening. And then the second one was going to be that we just stay the night. Now, they said that the hotels were full that they could give a voucher for, which is typically what the airlines do. Because of the Chief game. Now, this is the only kind of frustrating point from the company's side, and I don't know if that was a employee of American Airlines or if that was an employee of the Kansas City airport. Sometimes that line gets blurred, and you have to understand who you're talking to. Right.
And I don't honestly know.
I don't either, but I know that if you tell me that the plane is grounded for the night, I believe you. But if you tell me all the hotels in the entire city are sold out, I don't necessarily believe you.
Right.
So this comes into do some of your own research.
So immediately we jump on, because of the amount of travel we do, I normally have the big hotel chains apps on my phone already and profiles loaded and credit card loaded so I can book kind of quickly. Immediately you find all kinds of stuff right around the airport. And before we move on real quick, I do want to clarify one thing. This was Monday night football.
Okay.
I just looked at it real quick because we were supposed to take off on Monday because Sunday night we were at the game. We ended up getting home Tuesday. It's currently Wednesday morning, and you're going to hear this if you hear it when it comes out in an hour or two. So you'll hear it by midday on Wednesday. So
they all blend together,
But at that point, we decided to stay the night and find that hotel. So we find the hotel.
Suckers! There was a hotel.
There was actually quite a bit.
Really,
there
were
hotels.
Several of us on that flight got to this hotel.
Yeah, I would say there was probably at least 20 or 30 of us that were at this hotel, and I found availability through Hilton and Marriott, which are the two biggest chains, within 15 minutes of the airport, all over the place. So you have to really listen to how they say things because how they phrase it really, truly matters at the end of the day. And he said, so what it was is the hotel at the airport was full. And it was. Because it was a Hilton property. And I looked, because if I don't have to leave the airport, perfect. I can sleep longer. Right. Hopefully there's food somewhere nearby because the airport's still open for the most part. I mean, it's late. This is 11 o'clock at night now. But it is, there's functioning, and I don't have to get in a vehicle and figure all that out as well. So it takes a couple of layers of complexity out of the game. And this is an important part, too. They are if the participating airports that allow them to use vouchers from the airline, which is they give you a slip of paper printed out with authorization codes on it, you take it to the hotel, you check in with that voucher, and you don't actually give them a credit card for incidentals. I mean, still, but at that time too, they're not going to pay for your alcohol if you decide to hit the mini bar up. But even if you're diverted, they'll pay for food and that kind of stuff. So for us, we wanted to make it clear because they're required to refund us. And so they said, you submit your thing through AmericanAirlines.com. Well, to me, that's not good enough. I want to know where on the website to go. I want to know how to reference this thing. Because when someone just tells you, it's kind of like if you want a refund from Target for something. It's like, oh yeah, just go to the website, figure it out. That's what that sounded like to me. And so we made a point to listen to what the gate agent was saying twice, and then actually confronted him is probably a harsh word, but posed the question of, okay, so we can up to this, is there a dollar amount? Which he said, no, there is.
There is, but it's like
almost $3,000.
It's over $3,000.
Was it? Okay, yeah, it's thousands. So if you're just there for the night and you spend that much, you're probably not getting reimbursed. For all
exactly.
Of it.
It was very reasonable.
Yeah, and so from there, we asked the question again and said we want to know where on the website to go and what to do. And essentially, it's a contact us page, which he did not say at first. Essentially, you're sending an email to somebody, which is fine, but say that. Just be more clear. This is the only person, by the way, and I don't know who his name was. Don't care. It was some gate agent in Kansas City that just got stuck with us. This was the only person in the process during this flight that actually annoyed me a little bit. Because it was very broad, generic information. The second thing that he was talking about, because obviously this is the big question for everybody else, is what time do we need to be back?
Oh, yes.
And he said, well, between 9 and 10. Okay, how will we know? And he goes, if you look at the map or go to AA.com, or not map, if you look at your app, like where you get your boarding passes and all that stuff, or go to AA.com and just search for the flight, you'll find it. So everybody goes, okay, that makes sense. And we made sure our boarding passes were still on there. We're good. First tip, always, always, always download your boarding pass to your wallet if you're doing a digital one. I would argue, and maybe after this I'm going to start doing it, take a screenshot of it as well.
Right.
Because that app can still deactivate. And this happened to some people. So just know, like, if you're in the air, and maybe don't do it initially unless you just don't want to for the security, but if you know something's going wrong with the flight and there's a potential of anything happening, screenshot that real quick.
Well, their answers were also, they were not satisfactory to me, I guess you could say.
The gate agents.
The gate agents, yes. Because it was also like, okay, how do we know the information? What gate, what this and that? And every time he was like, no, we're just going to be here. And it was like, but what if that changes?
Right. How does that relate to us?
How do we know? And everybody said, okay, well, is it the same boarding pass? Do we get new boarding passes? He's like, no, it's yours. Well, we did download our boarding passes to our wallets and screenshotted them, but not everybody did. And actually, when we woke up the next morning, our boarding passes in the AA app were gone.
They were gone. Yep. Mm-hmm. So luckily, and I think a lot of the airlines are starting to shift where it forces you to put them in your wallet. I mean, at least you have to hit accept, but it defaults at like, no, you want to do this. You just have to allow it to do that. So don't ever not allow it, because the worst thing that happens is you have a little bit of a backup system. Not the perfect backup system, but it's better than using the app directly.
Unfortunately, if we had listened to him the whole way through, I think that would have created significantly more stress. We'd have lost the boarding passes.
Correct.
We'd have not had a hotel, several things. And so that was where a little bit of scrutiny kind of went a long way.
Well, and I think the other side, too, is his phrasing seemed like we listened to his spiel twice. So obviously there's a lot of people coming off the plane. It takes a minute. And he didn't want everybody to have to sit around, which I understand that portion of it. But we listened to the first version because we were, first 10 rows. So we heard the first version, and we waited to hear the second version as we were looking for hotels, because I figured if you hear it twice, the worst thing that happens is you get more information. And he phrased things differently both times. I think that's the other frustrating part, is like, now you're giving two sets of information, because they're leaving a whole lot of things up to hypotheticals. And there's, how sometimes if you give really clear instructions, so like if I looked at you and said, hey, will you grab a mug, versus, hey, will you grab a mug in the cupboard that says this on it? One leaves room for assumption, one doesn't.
Right.
He left a lot of room for assumption.
Yeah, he did.
And so once we felt confident in what we needed to do, we moved on. They did obviously get our bags off. I ended up having to check mine because of lack of space, which, for the love of, if you're not sitting in the row, please take your bag with you. I mean, it sucks if you don't, but you have to give people an opportunity to have their bag near them. I would have had to go on to the back half of the plane from the front half of the plane to get my bag in an overhead. We
were on row 4, guys. Row 4. And it was 4.
Okay.
And by the time he got on the plane, there was no room, which is
I
insane.
went back 8 rows, and I didn't see a spot still.
I snuck mine into first class just along the way and hope nobody said anything, because there literally was no room.
I'm just saying, when you board a plane, like, you can't just drop your bag and then walk 20 aisles back. Like, I understand that you could get on the plane early because of a medical thing or the military, and I appreciate that, but take your bag with you. Like, if you're on that early, you're going to have a spot. Like, I don't understand, and especially if there's a bulkhead. Some planes have this, some planes don't, where there's an actual bulkhead separating first class and coach. The people up front are still allowed 2 carry-ons, but we're not allowed to put it at our feet because there is no seat to put it in front of because it's a bulkhead. So understand that the people in the first 2 rows have to put 2 things up there, potentially 2 things up there if they brought them. So anyway, soapbox removed.
This goes back to being considerate of other people's space and things. Like, that's not your seat. Don't put your bag there.
Right. We load from front to back. I should have had space for 1 bag up top.
Absolutely.
At the bare minimum. I understand not 2, but 1. So anyway, so we end up getting a hotel right around the corner. We tried to get an Uber and a Lyft. For you finally called the hotel, and luckily they had a shuttle.
Multiple times, but again, because of the game, there's no Ubers, there's no Lyfts.
Well, the game, and then we were not the only flight here.
Right.
And so there was a lot of flights that had been diverted to Kansas City and Wichita and all over the place in the Midwest. So we eventually, in a nutshell, got to the hotel, DoorDashed some Whataburger.
At 1 a.m.
Took a shower, went to sleep, and for some ungodly, unholy reason, we're up at 5 a.m.
All right, that might be my fault. I have an internal alarm clock that was set to 6 a.m., and because that's when I get up for work almost every day. And then we had the time change, so now my internal alarm clock is set to 5.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Which we're working on. But we only have a couple of days into this, and one of them being the game day and some other stuff. So it's been a little bit chaotic when you travel sometimes as far as like your sleep schedule, and so we're off at the moment.
So we got a nap is what we got.
Yeah, which was better than nothing. I felt better the next day.
We got showered, napped, fed. It was better.
Right. And so, but at this point we've also eaten a lot of food out and fast food. So like, when you eat too much fast food, you feel greasy all the time. I had reached that stage.
Mm-hmm.
And so we decided to sleep in. We rested a little bit, got ready, and because they were so vague, we didn't know when to come back. So our first inclination that morning, once we had kind of gotten reasonably ready, we're like, okay, what time do we actually need to head back?
So we log on to our apps, and lo and behold, the flight's gone.
Yeah. So you can search for it, and it wasn't pulling it up. You couldn't change the day back a day, and so it's pulling up the current day's flight number.
But you also had
which
to
was
have
not our flight.
Right, and that's the thing. If you looked by the flight number, that was no longer our
you
flight.
have to have the day and the flight number.
You're right, and then there was a little code on the boarding pass that you could also use.
Yeah.
But if you didn't have your boarding pass, you didn't know the code.
So
it made
it's a
harder.
trip locator. If you also had your confirmation email or anything else, it's there. Like it's under your reservations. But as soon as you're done flying and 24 hours has passed, that goes away.
Right.
From your initial boarding time. So, yeah, luckily it's on your boarding pass as well as you could have looked it up and found it, but it would have been a big old pain in the butt. I ended up finding it through Google Flight Alerts.
Right.
Luckily. And then, of course, it says 11 o'clock, but it says estimated 11. Like,
Estimated.
Guys, we, to this moment, never got a notification. I got the boarding notification. That was the first notification I got that they were boarding about anything for the flights. That's on American.
Absolutely. So I'm also going to say the other thing we weren't warned about with reboarding the plane is that when we had to come back through security, our TSA pre-check didn't qualify.
Oh, that should have, which was annoying because now if there had been a big old line at the other side.
Exactly.
Because we didn't know when we were supposed to get there, like we're making an assumption that we've got pre-check because it's on our boarding pass.
Right.
Now, even if you have it, if it's not on your boarding pass, doesn't matter. You don't have it. Mm-hmm. It's had it. Because we had it on the previous flight. And the excuse the TSA used was, well, it's not because you flew in here. I think it's because they had to give them a manual list of all of the people coming back using a previous boarding pass, and they didn't give it to pre-check.
Maybe. But
I honestly think that's what it was.
But I just, if somebody is used to breezing through because they have it and they showed up kind of right at the last minute.
Again, lack of information.
Again, it was the lack of information, the lack of preparedness.
I would have been annoyed I didn't have it, but I much would have rather known when we got off the plane than, or at least prior to getting to the airport somehow, than that. Again, it just comes back to, I get that it's cumbersome to have that information handy, but the guy at the gate should have had a script that just insert information here kind of a thing and say it to a T this way, that way there's no confusion.
I know that diversions are a rare thing, but they do happen.
Sure.
And this was lack of company preparedness.
Correct. And then the TSA thing, which again, I know it happens, and that's on the TSA of, again, either American should have communicated that or TSA should have accommodated that. One of the two.
Right.
They can verify your TSA pre-check, your known traveler number. They can verify your passport, your boarding pass. Yeah, so I don't understand why that wasn't accommodated. But anyway, so we essentially get to the airport and then we get on the plane. And from this point on, everything is reasonably normal.
Yes, it is.
So It was an experience. Let's just say that. It can be frustrating, and I think the thing I want to leave you with on this is, Lauren and I experience stress from very different things.
Mm-hmm.
Like things that stress you out don't necessarily stress me out, and then vice versa.
Right.
Which is fun, which means we're always stressed a little bit
about
in some
something.
capacity. I think what's important, because we had a little thing where we got frustrated with each other, is to understand that you are in it together. And I think that's the one thing, and you and I have not talked about this, but is to understand that if you're traveling with someone or other people, I'm going to say kids with a little bit of an asterisk because they go where you go. Just tell them to shush and play a game for a minute if you need to.
Different level of preparedness.
Right. But as far as traveling with your partner, your wife, your husband, whoever it happens to be, friend, you're kind of in it together. So like I go where she goes where I go. Understand who is going to lead in some situations, and don't let the lack of communication coming from airlines, airports, whatever entity you're having to deal with, give an excuse for a lack of information in your relationship with that person, whoever it is. And you guys be on the same page and then have each other's back. Because I had a scenario where I did not have Lauren's back, and I'm not thrilled about it. So,
thank you. Well, and I think the other thing is that understand that just because it doesn't stress you out necessarily, you need to be paying attention to that person you're with, because they may be having a meltdown and you're not realizing it, and they are about to blow a gasket.
Well, and
so just be sensitive to that.
And it comes back to assumptions.
Right.
I assume because you have flown, you knew every single rule.
Mm-hmm.
I fly a lot more than you do.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, you've done it once. I think you should have it. And I didn't realize you didn't, because you may not have come across the situation. And we're not going to go into what it was, but you may not have come across that situation in a previous flight.
Well, and situation comes into play. We're tired. We're in an unfamiliar space. We're going through a strange process. We've just had kind of our whole plan and what turned upside down. We're going through pre-check. We're not going through pre-check. We don't have a boarding pass. Thank goodness we screenshotted something. Are we even on a list? It's a different
What day is
situation.
it? What time is it? What city am I even in?
And so you have to take that just with a little bit of grain of salt. Right. And again, just paying attention through the whole time and not creating situations that are unnecessary, not making it, neither of you making it worse than it has to be already.
At the end of the day, when you deal with a diversion, a weather delay, whatever it is, just know nobody's in a good mood. Like nobody's, the good mood might be a little drastic. You can be in a good mood and be stressed.
Sure.
I just understand that those pilots, the people there, for the most part, I'm not saying across the board, there's always that one guy or gal that just wants to be a prick for no reason. But for the most part, everybody wants you on the plane. Everybody wants to get you to the destination, because at the end of the day, they want to go home.
Mm-hmm.
And they can't go home until they deal with you. So have a little grace for the people around you. Be aware of what's happening around you. So you may be happy, but you just pissed off 45 people.
Right.
And just take a big, deep breath and get through it and make the best decision for you at the end of the day, regardless if that's sitting it out, sleeping on an airport bench, getting a room at the Ritz-Carlton, or bailing completely and buying a private jet and flying out.
Well, that was one conversation we had. Like, we went to the hotel to sleep, and when we got back, there were people asleep on the benches.
Sure.
And one of us said, who would do that? Why would you do that? And it was okay, well, let's think about why. Yeah. Instead of just saying, oh my gosh, why would anyone do that? Let's think about their why, because they may be in a different situation.
I was about to say, just because we can afford to go spend a little more than we probably would have on a hotel like this, because Chiefs game, crime of opportunity, last minute booking, all those things.
And bank on the reimbursement.
Even though it's being reimbursed, which again, we'll keep you updated if that actually happens. Even though it's being refunded, you still have to have the funds to do it, which is why I wish that they would expand and change how they do the voucher program as a whole, just because there were people that maybe couldn't afford that, and they got stuck in the airport for 9 to 10 hours and had to sleep on a bench that has an armrest that doesn't move.
Right.
So thank you so much for listening. I know we got a little soapboxy here. Hopefully you don't have to experience stuff like we did, but if you do, we're sorry.
Well, hopefully you found some tips, and you'll kind of hear our little voices if it does happen, about think of a few plans, pick one of them, have a little grace with everybody else.
And like I said, we will have trip recaps, city, what to do's, what not to do's, all the stuff we love to do. We just wanted to bring this to you nice and fresh. So thank you guys so much for listening, and we will catch you next week.